Hi guys, I'm holding a tiny microphone. I'm here to talk to you about information architecture. My name is Abby. So I have this slide at the beginning that I actually think I could probably skip, but I'm going to acknowledge that it exists. I have this just in case you guys hadn't gotten the hint yet that our world is full of some really messed up stuff right now. Some stuff that is starting to cause a lot of questions in terms of what do we do as designers and technologists and marketing and business people to avoid like ruining people's existence, right? No big deal. No big deal. We could ruin the world, but we're pretty sure that we're, in a place of good intentions, so we probably won't. But things like this scare the crap out of me. Like having to tell somebody in my family that they are the designate in case I die to shut down my Facebook profile, like that is an awkward conversation I didn't have to have a few years back. Now I need to have it, right? Like my world is more complex today than it's ever been before. And I would invite all of you to think about that statement for yourselves. Your world is probably more complex today than it's ever been before. And guess what? That's not going to change anytime soon. It's actually going to get more complex, which is sort of insane. Oh, hand mic, yes. Hello. This is so much less awkward. Okay, so let's talk about messes. I think that when you come down to talking about how to describe these problems, we get caught in a lot of jargon, right? We talk about responsive, we talk about Ajax, we talk about divs, and all these things that at the end of the day, outside of our community, we can't communicate with the people that we're working with on these things. So when I'm talking about these complex kind of issues in the world, I like to use the word mess. And the reason I like to use the word mess is because it makes sense to little kids. Your room can be called a mess pretty early in your life, and you know what that means, and you know it's not good, and you know that it's probably not what ought be the case for very long, right? So it's like a very human thing to understand messes. But the specific messes that I've become obsessed with over the course of my career is the messes that are made of information, because there's this other part to it, right? And that's the part that we bring, right? Information doesn't exist without us being here to bring it to life. And from everybody's predictions, right, I think that Richard Saul-Wurman said it really well back in the late 90s, there is a tsunami of information that is still coming our way. We are at the beginning of the kinds of things that we are dealing with. We are at the point where we are in between these two massive ways that are completely different from each other in terms of the way that we live and the way that we interact with each other and with our world and with the objects that we bring into our life. We used to have an analog existence. We don't anymore. But we don't not have an analog existence. It's just that we have this other thing, this digital existence, right? And more as we're exploring this territory, we're realizing that putting walls between those two things causes messes. It causes confusion, it causes the needles to go down when we wish they would go up, it causes frowns when we wish they were smiles. It has a lot of implication. So no matter what our job is, no matter what our goal in this life, it's full of messes that we need to make sense of over time. And there's a lot of different words that I could have chosen in describing what I'm talking about. And what I'm here to talk to you guys about today is that the word that I chose matters. And the words that you choose matter, even if you're not the writer, right? As Nicole so eloquently put it this morning. So the majority of messes are not just made out of information. They're made of people. We can't get any of this done by ourselves. We can't decide much without involving another human. And even if we are operating completely on our own, we are often not the person that we are making the thing for. There's usually another person involved. The more people, the more problems. We've heard a lot about that today. So thinking about information, it turns out, is incredibly fraught with complexity and anxiety and philosophy. I know, I promise it will make sense at some point. But I think that thinking about information, talking about information as a material, as something that you can build like places with, that still is very fraught with just discomfort, right? We're not comfortable with it. So why are we not comfortable with it? So if you think about the academic concept of information, it is not easy to explain to a child what the difference is between information and content, for example. And many of us, many of you in this room, I know I was one of them, I was brought up in a world where those were synonyms. Those are the same damn thing. I make content, I put it in my user's head, and there it sits, and it does whatever it's going to do. But it turns out it's not like that. It's not something that we can transfer like a material or a solid good, the way that we're used to kind of working in a more industrial world. And everything has information. So this idea that communities of thought have arisen about the idea of applying these ideas to web specifically, or to mobile specifically, or to retail displays specifically. It turns out that when you look across it, that's where the complexity is. That's where the messes happen. It's the consideration that the information is actually the single thing that all of these share. And often the organization that's producing all of these things is in silos, and those people are working with their own people on each one of those individual things. And looking across it doesn't happen, right? And if it does happen, it's on a smaller scale. Those large projects, it just feels impossible. And I think this is because information is not just the content that you have. It's not just the material that you can see. There's actually a concept of information existing from the lack of materiality. Now, I know that that's very confusing to hear. Like, it makes rips in matrices all through my belief system of like being able to understand truth in the world, right? It's sort of edging on this, okay, so what is real? Because I tell stories to myself all day long, and if that's not real, I don't know what is, because I have nothing else. I just have what's going on up here. And you all have that too. So for example, if I was to poll this room and ask, why is there a hole on this grocery store shelf? I might get 5 different answers, right? That product is sold out. That product is popular. That product was recalled, right? These are all different interpretations of the same content that is really what our unique interpretation is, right? It's very much unique to us and to our personal experience and the way that we have kind of put the world together into its model for ourselves. But there's a lot of things going on in that idea. This is saying that users are not just consuming your content, they're actually looking for what's not there and then filling in the holes with what you haven't put there. They're putting something in, which is a very complicated kind of thing to start discussing with people that are trying to just like make a website. And they're like, well, but what's not on your website is actually really important. And then everybody starts rolling their eyes and it's like, well, duh. But is it? Is that a well, duh? Is that something that we actively think about? The what's not there? This is another example I really like to use, mostly because people really like cookies, so that works out. So if you were to look at this picture, this is from a bakery in New York City around the corner from my house, you can make all sorts of judgments about these cookies. Half of you might be thinking, those oatmeal raisin cookies are not as popular as the double chocolate chip cookies. How many of you believe that? A couple of you? Okay, yeah, well, okay, yeah, like a quarter of you. Awesome. All right, so let me ask you this. What if, at the same time you're looking in this bakery case, you also overwhelmingly smell the waft of oatmeal raisin? Do any of you want to change your mind on your opinion that that cookie is not as popular? Okay, couple people. All right, so let me ask you this. Which one is fresher? How many of you think that the double chocolate chip cookie is fresher than the oatmeal raisin cookie? Okay, I introduced the smell too early, huh? Yeah, you all know. All right, so now here comes the rip in the matrix. Was there ever a second double chocolate chip cookie? How many of you think there was absolutely no doubt about it, there used to be more than one cookie on that plate? Come on. Yeah? Why? How do you know? Did you see it? No, you didn't. You're assuming it, right? We do this all dang day. We fill every void that we see with something that we've told ourselves so we can feel like we're wrapped in a nice little blanket of security where the world is okay and we can deal with this massive amount of ambiguity, right? We do it all the time. So I know that this is just cookies, but this is not just cookies. You guys know this is not just cookies. This applies to everything, right? So let's dissect the scene, because I think that going back to that synonymous relationship of content and information that's so prevalent, I mean, even out of my own mouth, I cannot police myself enough from synonymizing them. But they're not the same thing, and that difference is actually incredibly important for us to pay attention to. So we have the data, we have all the things, the basket of crazy that I'm carrying around up here, all the stimuli that I can encounter, all the data that I have, all the data that's around me, kind of influences what I'm going to come up with in my head of what's going on right now. Then we have the content. The content is the actual stuff, right? It's the stage, it's this podium, me, you, we're all content. That's kind of weird, but we are for this event, and to Bruno, we're content. Information is the unique interpretation that we all leave with at the end of the experience. Now, in the case of the cookies, this comes in two flavors, right? It's the belief or non-belief that there were ever other cookies on that plate. I know, it's not comfortable, but it's true. And then the subjective reasoning that we have decided for the unequal amount of cookies, right? Do we think it's because of popular? Do we think it's because of freshness? Do we think because somebody decided they wanted to sell more, double chocolate chip cookies that day? Who knows? But these things are fundamentally different from one another. And starting to talk about that with the people that you work with and for can really unlock this ability for us to understand that we can't just take something and put it into somebody else's head. I am giving you content right now. It is based on my information. I am trying to translate it as clearly as possible into the information in your head, and on a case-by-case basis, I am doing a very good job, a shitty job, or everything in between, right? We just don't know. So this is where it gets kind of dark. It turns out that when you start talking about how there maybe wasn't ever another cookie there, and all these things about deception that we heard this morning, you have to go back to philosophy, right? The idea of truth is an illusion. We don't have a common one. There's no one single version. If you went on the version control of truth, I guarantee you it would be more complex than the version control of Brad's Photoshop document. It just isn't that clean, right? And we have this responsibility because of that, right? It's the thing that keeps us from advising people to do things like this example. I have 2 doctors that recommend this thing. I don't necessarily need to say that 8 didn't recommend this thing, right? Now, if that wasn't a doctor, how much worse would that be? Or how much better might that be, right? You're all applying your own information to this right now and going, yeah, that's really evil, or that's okay, or that happened to me last week and I approved it, it was fine. I mean, there's all these different experiences that we have. And when we make and use these things, we're actually making them and using them within a nested set of structures, right? Things don't exist in vacuums. So when Brad was breaking it down to molecules and atoms, I mean, that's the real work. That is what we're doing here, right? We're looking all the way through to the bottom of whatever it is that we're creating. But the level that you actually personally have as a designer or a technologist or a marketer or a business person or a student or what have you, your level of focus changes what you can see. When you are asked to work on the page, it is very hard to see not the page, right? When you're asked to work on the system, it is really hard to look at all the buttons, right? So there's this assignment that we have of ourselves to a certain level. And I think that the opportunity here is to start to work through what does it look like to actually move through those levels as teams and across our different specialities and research methodologies and what have you, and to really bring this picture together over time. Because these levels of place are deeply intertwingled, as Ted Nelson has said. And that means that they're not predictably linked. We don't know what's going to happen when we do something over here, something over there might go terribly, terribly awry, right? So I think Carl Sagan said it very beautifully. We have to make an apple pie from scratch, you must first invent the universe. Now, the reason that I love this quote is because it invites us to both think about the impact that we have and how everything is connected, but it also urges us to decide, what are we focusing on? because we're just making a dang pie. Like, we don't have to talk about the universe. But deciding not to talk about the universe is an important part of making the pie. That's where you get centered. Deciding, I'm not going to consider the system, I am going to make a page, and I know that I'm doing that. That's where we have to get to. We have to get to the knowledge of what we are, in fact, influencing. And this is because of dominoes, right? We all know what happens when you knock the domino. It just goes, right? Every change could potentially change something else. And it could set off a ripple effect that could take down your whole business, for all you know. I think that the biggest thing standing in our way is politics, right? The politics of making sense. The very complex and fraught with people's personalities and hierarchical decisions on who works for who pays who cares about spending time with who. I mean, all these things impact our day. And there's very few projects where we don't have to move through messy systems like this to get our work done. This is actually a fairly simple one, right? This probably looks a lot like your world in whatever you're working on today. But the idea that every single one of these people needs to buy in, right? We talk about that all the time, buying in. We have to sell them the idea. We have to get them to buy in. What if we needed to work together? What if we needed to make sure that whatever it is we're sending through that network makes sense to all of those people so that we're laying concrete, right? We're not trying to build stuff on sand that's just going to fall through when you get to the visual design side or fall through when you finally test it or whatever. It's starting to feel like it's not an option anymore. We can't continue to work in the way that we sell through this process. Everybody does have an opinion. They're allowed to have an opinion. It's like that other thing that all of us have, right? We're allowed to have that. It is normal to have disagreement with your colleagues, especially when the conversation is about something major, like your business model or what you call something internally, or with your users, or how you allocate funds or people. These are all things where opinions are part of the game. You don't get to choose your way out of having other people disagree with how you see the world. And this is where frustration actually develops, right? We can get very frustrated with people when they can't read our mind, right? And our hands do a really crappy job of like interpretive dancing, what's going on up here. Like, I'm doing it right now. This is ridiculous. I can't wait to watch the video. I do this all the time, right? This is something that we do. When we're doing this, it's because we're trying to make something make more sense to people, right? And that's where frustration occurs. When people have different fundamental views in their own heads about the same thing, right? And this is called a mental model, right? The mental model that you have for going to a conference, for example, is slightly different than the mental model that I have for going to a conference. Our disagreement can be productive, but it can also be incredibly destructive if we walk away, if we get frustrated and we walk away, which we do all the time. So what can solve that? I think it's really about objects, right? And I take that at its grandest scale, objects, things. We need things. We need to physicalize these conversations. We need something that we can actually compare our mental models using. Because otherwise, we're stuck in our head, getting more and more frustrated that our words and our hands are not enough. They just don't seem to be enough sometimes. And that's normal, right? We all know that when we have something to point to, it is easier to agree on it, right? Imagine trying to do the job that you do now without the use of any objects at all. You had to talk everything through. That would be a miserable experience, right? Because objects add the ability for us to actually have those conversations without all that pain. We get to sort of shorthand our way through it. And with that agreement, we have momentum. And we've all been on projects where momentum, it feels impossible. It feels like the holy freaking grail to just get people to start, right? And this is what stands in the way, is when we don't have agreement, when we can't put the same model on paper and all go, yep, that's what the thing is. That is what it does. That is what we call it. That is cool. That is, yep, I'm on board, I'm on board, I'm on board, right? You got that one person who's not, but is never asked if they are. That is the person that's crushing your project 12 weeks later in production, right? That is the person who's not approving the next phase of whatever it is that you're trying to work on. That is the person who is writing the email after the meeting and going, well, actually, I don't really agree, but I didn't want to say anything because so-and-so is in the room, and blah, 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 blah. This is all normal. This is what we do. This is how humans work. So the agreement part, I'm not going to call it easy, but it's incredibly important. So often, it is more than two people, and it is more than two models. Yesterday in my workshop, I had people start by individually assessing a situation for a persona. And they had to do that for 15 minutes by themselves. And then I gave them a partner. And then they had to do that together for 15 minutes. And then I combined pairs. And I think anybody that was in there will tell you that as you go up in the number of people, oh my gosh, the number of like, what, huh, and the anxiety starts going up. People start getting protective of their ideas. They start like having little factions or pitching against each other. I mean, like, all those things. These are strangers that just met at a conference and they already have opinions about a fake design assignment that I just gave them like 5 minutes ago. How is this the thing? Back to the cookies or the jars of jam. We just can't handle uncertainty. We have to put something in that box. We need to know how to solve that thing. We need to know what to call that thing, right? So we do, and we just do it. So a mess like this can feel impossible to make sense of. I'm on an assignment right now where there are 14 different terms for the word video. In English. Yeah, that's a lot of things, right? Are they all the same? They don't know. They don't know. We have to look at all the things and ask, are they the same? Does there need to be 14? Maybe there really are 13, and I'm only going to get rid of one. I think I'm going to get rid of more than one. But you don't know. You don't know until you actually have those kind of conversations. So many people do get overwhelmed at this point. This is the point where I get excited. Many people get overwhelmed. And they think of ways to hide the mess, right? They put up a sign saying, like, please excuse our mess. We're working on it. Or like maybe some help text or something like that. You know, we've all done this. Or they think of ways to pretty up the mess. 3 of my favorites being fancy front-end fluffing, a new user tutorial to explain the mess, or perhaps an incentive structure for dealing with it at all. Now, you guys all saw examples of all 3 of these things this morning, or this afternoon, or in your workshops yesterday. This is all over the world. And I'm not even going to say all over the digital world. This is all over the world. But the mess is still a mess. That thing that you're scared of solving is still there. The illusion of it being fixed only lasts so long. So all you've really done at this point is bought yourself time. And I'm here to tell you, with time, messes grow. They get bigger. They're like barnacles or broken windows. Once you have one, you have lots of them. And then they're harder to get rid of, right? This is how the world works. It's how everything is. So complexity, it's sort of like a rabbit hole. It's sort of like a dark, dank hole that nobody wants to go into by themselves. And sure as heck, nobody wants to be the first one that goes down there with the headlamp and leads the way for all the other explorers to go down, right? These are rabbit holes I love to jump into and then come back up and go, hey guys, it's actually not that bad down here. Come on, let's go. We'll go down together. It'll be safe. It'll be fine, right? And I think that we need to have these kinds of moments with our partners in this kind of work. We need to tell them it is okay that this is complex. It is normal that this is complex. It is something all companies, all people, all of humanity is dealing with right now. I hate to say this to my clients, but I do. You are not special. None of you. None of you. Me, you, nope. We're not special. We're the same. We think about these things differently, but at the end of the day, we all deal with the same kind of complexities. And complexity is not the only rabbit hole that I find myself taking people down. We have the rabbit holes of uncertainty, politics, history, and fear as well. Just in case I was like running out of work, I'll just go down all those other holes. And those holes are just as nasty. Some of them are nastier. The fear hole, God, I have trouble going down that one, right? To get people to actually talk about what they're afraid of from the work that they're doing, or what could go bad, what could go really, really wrong. That's hard stuff to talk through, but important. So information architecture, I promised that I would talk to you about that today, so I should probably get on to it. IA is the tools and concepts that we use to help people make sense of messes made of information and people, right? And that and people, super important. because this shit does not work by yourself. It does not go. I can make a beautiful taxonomic diagram that makes so much sense in my head. I show it to another person and it's like, what? No, nope, crushed, right? What is the point of doing that? What is the point of making diagrams for myself, expecting that it's gonna be reading the mind of the people that I'm working with, right? Instead, bringing those people through the process tends to be the key to success. So as a thing, right, if we had to make it like an object, information architecture is the way that we choose to arrange the parts of something to make it understandable as a whole. So many of you might be familiar with IA's most popular repertoire standard, which would be the site map and navigational blueprint for a website, perhaps a mobile app, maybe an intranet, woo, right? All of these words you've heard before. IA is those things. But what about all the other things? What about the way that we put together a restaurant menu, right? Like a physical one that you're like holding in your hands, printed on papers with stuff made from trees, something about sun, clouds. No? Okay. We'll talk about paper later, but it's there. It's still a thing that we deal with. So information architecture is not just something that happens in digital places. It's actually an incredibly fundamental way that we think about the world that we're in. Information architecture is also one of my favorite retronyms because it is a label for a thing that's always existed that we just didn't come up with a name for until fairly recently. There's a pretty solid rumor that I'm going to go ahead and call almost fact that for a very long time in the 90s, information architecture was actually called the pain with no name. Yeah, it's sexy, right? I want that like tattooed on my forehead. So it turns out that we spend a lot of our lives trying to make sense of things so that we can work with other people. Think about if you've ever tried to get a small child onto a routine, right? Many parents will make things like charts or diagrams, or they use a whiteboard to track things, right? Think about if you've ever tried to plan a party with another person and the spreadsheets or Google documents or whatever you did to work through that process. You are trying to work through the complex art, not science, of figuring out what are the parts of this thing and how are we going to arrange it so it makes sense to this person that I'm trying to encounter. So today I want to very quickly walk through what are, I think, starting to really become considered the critical components of information architecture. And this is not a process, right? This is more like cutting open a tree and seeing the rings. So if we were going to cut open an information architecture and see the rings, these are the rings that we might see. So I'm going to go through each one of them. They're all academic-sounding words. I hope that I can get you to use them conversationally, but maybe not. Let me know. Ontology. I'm going to start here. You guys, if you were in my workshop yesterday and you steal my thunder on my joke, I'm going to be pissed. No, seriously. Somebody from my workshop had the great fortune of cracking this nut for the audience. This is a fish. This is not a fish because it lives near water, although it does. This is not a fish because I said so. That's actually one of my favorite answers when I say this in class. Like, why did I say this is a fish? And they're like, because you said so and you're trying to trick us? No, 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 no. There is actually a large group of people in this world that consider this to be a fish. That's confusing. Turns out the Catholic Church redesignated this animal, the capybara, to be considered a fish for the purposes of eating on Fridays. Yeah. So this is ontology. What do we mean when we say what we say? If I'm Catholic and you say I can only eat fish on Friday, how am I supposed to know that that furry creature that is definitely not a fish by science's standards is actually edible on Fridays, right? Not the first time that the Catholic Church has messed with science, but probably not the last time either. So meaning is incredibly subjective. It's super demographic. It's socio-political. Ooh, right? Ooh. It gets very lost in translation. Think about the game of telephone. I don't know if that's what they call that in other places, but in America we have a game called telephone. Little kids play it. Somebody starts with one like little statement and they whisper in the ear of the next person, and then by the end it's always a ridiculous mangle of what the first person said, right? This is a human lesson. This is what we do. The reason we have a game about it is so kids are prepared for that being like their work life from now on. It's like a big old freaking terrible game of telephone where that's not what I said, that's not what I said, that's not what my diagram is, you know, and all these things. So ontology is the act of choosing the language that's going to be used or not used in a specific circumstance. When Facebook decided to turn the word like into a noun, they were practicing ontology. When McDonald's decided to refer to items on their menu by number to be consistent across regions, they were practicing ontology. When a HIV needle exchange clinic in New York City decides to call the people that go there participants to lower the staff's use of the word addict in front of the people that were coming there, they are practicing ontology. These words that we choose deeply affect the way that people interact with us and who they believe us to be. So controlled vocabularies have gotten a bad rap. They are massive documents that are written and then put in binders and like live on somebody's desk, and not many people care about them. I think that's a problem. I'm trying to bring back the controlled vocabulary. I think it's a really important document, not just for software, but for people. So working with your organization to understand what is the language that we use and how much can we actually enforce consistency of language to maintain some level of consistency in our understanding of our customers, our business, and what have you. And I know this sounds hard. It is. It is hard. Defining words is hard. Discussing your differences of opinion on the way they're defined is even harder. But guess what? Designing interfaces without having those conversations is even harder. That's where we get frustrated. That's where we're like, wait, but I thought you knew what I was talking about 6 months ago when we wrote that scope document. You don't know what I'm talking, oh no, now everything's crushed, right? And we build these little illusions for ourselves, and then we can take them all the way down to the floor. This is one of my favorite controlled vocabularies. This is from New York Magazine. Kurt Anderson was the pen of this. It is words we do not say, right? In a news organization, think about how hard it would be to define and identify all of the words you do say for a controlled vocabulary. So they went the opposite way. And I actually find that this is maybe one of the best things that any organization could try to make for themselves. It has immediate value. People are like, oh, I didn't know I wasn't supposed to say that. I'm making this worse? Oh, edit my mouth. I'll just edit it right out, right? And it takes time. When you tell people they can't say anything, something that they've said for 5 years, oh my gosh. I just told my current client they're not allowed to say the brand name from the product that got them where they are. No more. We're not saying it anymore because it's confusing and it's not who you are anymore, and I have my reasons, right? And they saw it. We had the discussion. But it's still not like a switch that I can like go in on a Monday and be like, well, reboot, everybody's system knows that word, no longer, find and replace. We don't work like that. We are messy inside. So we need to start with language, not interfaces. I see too many projects fail because language did not get considered. And by language, I do not mean content. I do not mean the writing on the thing that you've already decided what it is. I mean the language we use to describe the pieces, the labels that we give to things to talk with one another, right? The way that we talk about those things changes the interfaces we will eventually make. And I think it's important at this point to remind you double that it's not just words. It can be icons, it can be smells, it can be light, it can be anything, right? There's all these sorts of ways that we can communicate with one another. So to reduce language to words is just not enough, right? Does everybody know what this little 3-line doohickey is? Somebody shout out, what is that called? The hamburger menu. Now, let me ask you this. Do you think that the person that did that the first time was like, I have created this thing and I deem it the hamburger menu? Like, did that happen? He hopes so. Well, it's a delicious decision. So the problem that we have is that when we move away from words, we are often brought back. It's like, no. You thought you were going to get away with not having a word and being cute for menu, and you're going to have a little thing? No, guess what? Somebody's going to call it a hamburger menu. You know why? Because it has to go in a customer service script so it can be read via a 1-800 number over the phone to a person who's like, I can't find my navigation. Where did you put my navigation? Right? This is uncomfortable. Can you imagine sitting in a cubicle with a thing on your face going, yep, scroll to the hamburger menu, right? What's the likelihood that you're actually going to have to define that further for somebody before they find it? You're going to have to be like, it's blue, it's got 3 lines, it's up top, it's at the top, but you can't use your hands, you're on the phone, right? Can't point at things. Very, very difficult. We call this an uncontrolled vocabulary. And there's nothing wrong with an uncontrolled vocabulary, except it increases what we call linguistic insecurity. And linguistic insecurity is something that is no fun for anybody to deal with. It's something that we have all felt. When somebody is talking over you or talking in a language that you don't understand, you feel anxiety. You're like, is it me? Is it me? Is it me? We're constantly thinking, is it me? Is it them? I don't know. Is it the context? Am I in the wrong place? So people suffering from this kind of linguistic insecurity really suck to collaborate with. They shut off. They literally shut off their ears. They're not listening anymore. They're just nervous. They're just like, please stop talking so I can leave the room and not think about how stupid I am right now. Think about the linguistic insecurity that we are inflicting on our users, right? Of like, just, screw it, I'm closing the window, I can't even, right? That happens to me like 5 times a day, and I consider myself pretty good at like navigating the crap that we use on the internet. So taxonomy is really the way that we bring these things together. It's the way that we connect the words that we've picked, the language that we've chosen to use to represent those things that we have, and the structure that ultimately brings it all together. We can all agree that if I was to rip all of the words out of your favorite book and throw them on the floor, you would not be able to give that to somebody as an experience that was anything like your favorite book. We also can all imagine that you could pick up all those words and arrange them a multitude of other ways. We could arrange them alphabetically to have a lexicon of the book. We could arrange them by what those words mean in similarity, so we would have a thesaurus of the book. We could put them all into a database and allow somebody to search and pull it up for pages of the book, right? These are all taxonomic structures that we can imply. So Richard Saul Wurman, one of my favorite thinkers and people, inventor of the TED Talk, coiner of the term information architect, kind of a swell guy. He said, there are only 5 ways to organize anything. And this really pisses people off. They're like, no, we're so much more complex than that. And you're right. And so is he. Because there's 2 levels to this thing. He has identified in a really brilliant and simple way that there really are kind of like 5 meta patterns that organization tends to take on, right? We've got location, we've got alphabetical, we've got time, we've got category, we've got hierarchy. The problem is actually at the next part, where you say, okay, fine, we're alphabetical. We'll go with that. So this is my husband. We are newlyweds. One of the first things that you do when you get married is you combine your vinyl collection and you say, I'm not going to put a Post-it note with my name on all my records in case this doesn't work out, right? You just don't do that. That's not how this works. So you have to agree on the way that you arrange the records. And in the case of our experience, I am fairly anal about organization of things. I don't know if you guys picked that up. So I have Post-it notes that are little alphabetical sections, and we're rough sorting into those sections, and then we're going to do a more deep sort to get them to be alphabetical, right? About halfway through this process, my husband holds up Michael Jackson's Thriller, and he says, this goes under M, right? And I died. Like, I died. Like, I was like, I married this person. Oh, my God, what did I do? Like, half of you are like, what's wrong with that? Mm-hmm. That's the problem. Half of you are thinking alphabetical. Michael Jackson, M, right? So where else could Michael Jackson be found alphabetically? I don't know, with the other freaking Jacksons, perhaps, right? Doesn't he want to be with his people, with his Jackson family, his 5? But no, M. So, I know, he married me too, just remember that. So, so we decided that we needed to find out the truth of the matter. So we went to the record store, and we had this bet. It was like, dude, I'm sorry, but when we get there, Michael Jackson is going to be under J. Like, this is going to be really embarrassing for you. And he's like, nope, 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 nope. Every step, just nope, nope. So freaking confident. We get there. What do you guys think? How many of you think that at Generation Records in the West Village in New York freaking City, they are organizing things by first name alphabetical? How many of you think that? It's 25 years old. Thanks for asking. That does matter. All right, the ones that raise their hand for that? No, it's not. Of course not. Now, why do you believe that? I was really interested in that. I was like, what? Like, my husband's not an uneducated man, and he likes music, and he likes books, and he likes all the other things that I would associate with this kind of weird decision that we've made to be always alphabetical by last name, unless you use the word the in the front, and blah, blah, blah. But he didn't know any of that, and I was like, why doesn't he know that? So we're walking back from the record store, and he's like looking at his device and like really intent on proving his point, right, at this point. So we've switched analog to digital. And he goes, aha, I knew it. iTunes, alphabetical first name. Spotify, alphabetical first freaking name. RDO, alphabetical first name. And I was just like, oh my God, I use those products every day. I've never noticed. I've never noticed. Why? Because it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. There's no right way. There's no wrong way. There's my way or the highway, but there is no actual right or wrong to any of this, which, you know, I know we're back to the anxiety about the universe and all that. So organizing things is actually not the hard part. Agreeing on how to organize them is the harder part. That's the part that we get tripped up on. Once we have the rules and the rules are solid and the rules actually cover everything the rules should, we just sort that stuff out. We'll just organize that information right up, right? But the agreeing on how to do it, that can take years. So facets are generally how we do that. We have all these unique individual pieces of knowledge about whatever it is that we're organizing. And we can use those discrete pieces of knowledge to indicate how we might apply latch to our actual stuff, right? Those 5 ways that Richard Saul Wurman came up with can be applicable at a much more detailed and granular level. And this tends to be the part where people go, oh, so it's not just 5 ways. It's 1,000,000 ways, infinite ways. And that's why he wanted there to be 5, right? Because there's too many to say it's 1,000,000. So if we were to have 10 facets of a piece of produce, right, everything from color to texture and taste and seasonality and things of that nature, we could take that list of facets, we could merge it with something like latch, and all of a sudden, very quickly, we can come up with 20 different ways to organize that same box of produce, right? Now that's really powerful because there's different uses for every single one of these organization schemas. You would not organize a website for grocery store shoppers by alphabetical scientific name. That would be dumb, right? We all can agree that would probably be dumb. But do you know? Do you know that that's dumb? What if your website was for horticulturalists or farmers? Then would that maybe actually make sense? So a lot of times we walk into an assignment believing that there is one way, that there's my way, and that's the way that it's going to be. But it turns out there's 1,000,000 ways that this could go. So our taxonomy is actually the rhetoric. This is where we decide what kind of thing are we, right? And the way that you arrange your vegetables says a lot about who you are. The way you arrange everything in your life says a lot about who you are. This quote, I just can't stop saying it. It takes knowledge to know that a tomato is a fruit and wisdom not to put it in a fruit salad. Now, tomatoes probably, I know, people are like, yeah, I got the tomato thing. Squash, olives, peppers, all of those, right? Avocados. I could just keep coming up with them. They're fruit, you guys. They are fruit. I don't care if you put them in salads. I don't care if you saute them. They are still fruit. They're still fruits, right? But me walking around banging that drum on a grocery store assignment is an inappropriate use of that information that's in my head. It's like, well, yeah, that might be dumb that people don't know science about fruits and vegetables, but it is the way that people eat. It is the way people buy their food. It is the way that our business needs to actually organize. So these mental models really matter. Knowing that your customers believe a tomato to be a fruit instead of a vegetable, or vice versa, is the key to succeeding in terms of finding the thing that they're trying to find. Now, do not go into the whole, well, you just put it in both. Because if you just put everything in both, then what is anything anymore, right? The labels become completely meaningless. So there are times when we put things in both, but in the case, it has to be a case-by-case basis. It has to be gently considered each and every unique time. And the third piece to this is the choreography. So choreography is really what comes down to, what do you intend for the users to do? We talk about choreography as something that we learn in dance, perhaps, or theater, right, and blocking. But choreography is something that you all do as part of your jobs, too. You decide what are the steps of this dance and how do we want people to learn about them? How strict do we want to be on how we make them dance? And this really comes down to understanding our world across both contexts and channels. So what's the larger circumstance that I'm in, including my mindset, my environment, everything? And then what's the channel? What's the actual medium or the passageway that I'm using to get my content to that other person? And how you choreograph your product says a lot about you as well. So if you think about something like Instagram, we have a pretty major question right away. Why doesn't Instagram.com allow me to upload a photo? Is that hard? Have they not figured out how to do that yet? Does anybody think that they haven't done it yet because they can't afford it? Okay, good. So we can all agree, like, this is purposeful. They purposefully don't want us to do that. Why? Because it wouldn't be instant. They'd be flicker. The choices here matter, and it's not about the user's want. I'm sure that there have been many DSLR users who have written to Instagram over time and been like, hey, what's with that? Why can't we just have an upload feature? It's really annoying that I got to email my photos to myself so that I can post them on my Instagram, right? That's annoying. That's a user desire. That could be on their roadmap. But it's not, because it would change fundamentally who they are, and that's not the dance they want users to do. And there's many examples like this. The site Medium, the blogging platform, you can't edit with your thumbs. You cannot edit from a mobile device. It doesn't matter if you're logged in, it doesn't matter if you download their app, it does not matter. This is not because they haven't gotten to it yet. This is because they've chosen to stay with their interface and their business model. We don't think people should write manifestos on the internet with their thumbs. We just don't think that your best work is going to come out that way. And they've maintained that as what they are and how they do their things. But choreographing that simplicity can be really complex. The minute that you're like, oh, well, the thing over here is different than the thing over there, oh, everything gets scary again, right? So to think that by dividing it, it gets simpler, no. But for users, it needs to be simple. Right? So this is a hierarchy diagram that I made of all of the nouns and verbs in Instagram as a product. I don't know about you guys, but there's a lot of stuff up there, right? Like, that's a lot of things to fit in that tiny little nav. But they've done it, and they've done it really beautifully. So I want to leave you with a couple of warnings. The first one is information architecture always exists. You don't get to put it there later. You don't get to, like, oh, we'll do that in the next phase, or what have you. It's not a feature. It's the backbone. It's the thing we cannot exist without. So what happens is, if you are not considering your information architecture, it considers itself. And that can get really ugly, you guys. You've all seen the direct result of that in both your work and personal lives. So the second piece to this would be, information architecture is not just for information architects. I happen to be a person who's decided to spend my life specializing in this very nerdy, very nerdy, very nerdy, very boring, very nerdy thing. That doesn't mean that only people who are that can do this. And in fact, to believe that or to walk around saying that to people is destructive, because you all are already making information architecture. It's just, how much are you considering it? How much are you talking about it? And once you have a name for that pain, that's how we can get alleviation. That's how we can move forward, right? It's by talking about it, by calling it out and saying, yeah, we have an eye ache problem. Just say it out loud. Just try it in the mirror at home. And then say it to your colleagues, and then your boss, and then your CEO, and then your users. It feels really good. So the last piece I want to say is, if you make anything, you're probably already architecting information. You're probably already practicing all of the things that I just talked about. So let's get better. And that's what I have for you. Thank you so much.